In this video, I'm gonna share my top easing tools for After Effects that help you get your animations done more quickly. These are tools that I use myself and that I think you should strongly consider, so let's jump into it. Now, before we get started, I want to point out that I've been using After Effects for a long time. I've looked at a lot of easing tools for After Effects, and these are the ones that I think are the best, that offer the most value for what you're paying and will actually help you work faster as an animator without taking away the personal touch of you being in control of your keyframes. And you have no excuse as a motion designer not to be getting into the graph editor and understanding how these tools work, to have full control over the way that your animations actually move. I actually have a video about this. If you click the card above, you can check that out. And I just want to reiterate that none of the tools I'm about to talk about take away any of the creative control that you have as the animator, and I won't be talking about any tools that do that. I don't think that those are good tools. They are not worth your money. You should be the one responsible for the way that your animations look. But once you understand how to use the graph editor, that doesn't mean that we can't use some third-party tools to help speed up the process. And if after watching this video, you decide to purchase any of the products that I talk about, I would really appreciate it if you use my affiliate links down in the description. One of them even has a discount. The first tool I want to take a look at is Duik Angela, which most people look at as a character rigging tool only, but it actually has an entire suite of animation controls, including easing assistance. So let's take a look at how that works. The first thing I want to point out is that Duik Angela is a script, which, as far as I know, it's the biggest script that has ever been created for After Effects, and it kind of shows. There is so much to learn about in this script that I don't even know what everything does, but this tab right here, the little bouncing ball icon, this is the animation tab. And if you didn't know, all of these scripts can actually be docked as their own panel. So if I go up to Window, I've installed the Duik animation script, which is just this panel. So if you only wanted this panel docked and you didn't want the rest of Duik at all times, you absolutely could do that. Even so, there's still a lot of clutter in this panel, and you really have way more than just easing controls. But let's take a look at this section and see what it can do for us. So I just have a ball going back and forth on my comp with linear keyframes, and it's looping. These sliders right here is what I want to point out. If I click and drag on this one right here, what it's going to do is change the influence handles. If I jump into my speed graph, let me just go to the speed graph right here and select my keyframes. I now have handles on here. As I increase this, it's gonna pull the handles inwards on both directions because I have both values linked with this little chain link right here. That's why they're moving together. So if I unlink them, I can do them asymmetrically. So incoming and outgoing velocity are now separated. But then down here, this is the actual velocity of the keyframe. So easing up here, velocity down here. And I just landed at 91%. What that means is it's going to raise the velocity of these keyframes to 91%. Generally, I like my keyframes to start and end at 0 velocity so that they're easing in and out of a resting position. So let me just click on this 0 right here, and it will set all of those keyframes to 0 on the velocity incoming and outgoing. And now I can just interactively adjust these sliders to modify my speed graph. And I don't even need to be in the speed graph to see that happen. So if I lower this one a lot, lower that one a lot, now it's not gonna be quite as eased. I could link these back up to have symmetrical easing. It's really, really quick and easy to use, and it's totally free. That is the biggest pro of Duik Angela, is that it's 100% free for you to download and use. I would strongly encourage you, if you get good use out of this script, to support the developer for future updates. It's completely crowdfunded, so consider donating to the development of Duik. As you can see, there's a lot more going on here. There are tools for keyframe management, for timing. You can even save presets. You can use the ones that came with it or even make your own custom presets. There are even tools for spatial interpolation that is really useful. I'm not gonna get into all of these controls, but the simple ability to change the speed graph without having to get into the speed graph is a great feature of Duik Angela. It can be applied across any number of keyframes, any type of property, and does a really good job of it. Now from here on out, all the tools I'll be talking about are paid, but the amount of time that they'll save you with all of the features that they offer make the cost 100% worth it, in my opinion. And if you do choose to purchase any of these tools after watching this video, please use the links down in the description because those are affiliate links, and a couple of them will even have discounts to save you some money, so go check that out. The next tool I want to talk about is Motion 4 from Mount MoGraph, which if you haven't heard of, you must be living under a rock. It is one of the most popular extensions for After Effects. It's beautifully designed, incredibly responsive, and it's really the Swiss Army extension of After Effects. It has so many tools that I could just go tell you, buy it right now and you will never regret your purchase before I even talk about it. It's seriously that good. I've been using it all the way back since version 1 when it was basically just speed sliders, which is what I want to take a look at here. There are actually way more features of Motion 4 that I'm not gonna cover in this video. Matt at Mount MoGraph has made extensive documentation for every one of the tools, and actually Nick Greenewalt over at Motion by Nick has a great video showcasing all of these features, but this is actually one of those tools that you can save a little bit of money on if you use the promo code JAKE. Matt has hooked us up, thank you so much for that. That actually works on any Mount MoGraph purchase, so go check that out. Now right here we have 3 different sliders. If I click and drag the middle slider in either direction, it's going to symmetrically ease the incoming and outgoing velocities of my selected keyframes, and I'm gonna get this nice little bell curve preview of my speed graph right in the extension. So great visual feedback of what I'm actually doing, and that easing has been applied to my keyframes just like in Duik Angela. I think it's a little bit more responsive since it is an extension and not a script, so it has that going for it, but we can also do this asymmetrically just like Duik Angela, where we can adjust the incoming and outgoing velocities individually. You could type in custom numbers, but you can also interactively adjust your speed curves by clicking and dragging in the graph, and it's a very unique, interactive way of adjusting speed within the easings of your keyframes. Now, one thing about the speed controls in Motion 4 is that it's always going to set these keyframes to a starting and ending velocity of 0. So no matter what I do in here, if I select all my keyframes and apply some easing, it's gonna snap that down to 0, which that is how I like to work, so I don't see that as a con at all. You can always go in and modify the velocity if you don't want it to start or end at that 0 velocity. We also have custom presets that you can create down here and manage them very easily. So I've set up some presets that I use very often and can quickly apply just by clicking on any of these. It's a really nicely designed system and makes it very easy to customize. And there are so many other tools in this extension to talk about. I mean, this list right here is every single tool that comes with Motion, in addition to color swatch management, layer focusing, all kinds of extra tools. Like I said, if you buy it right now, you will never regret your purchase. Matt is always updating this tool and adding new features. There was just recently a particle generator added to this system within the extension, a layer offsetter. There are so many useful tools in this extension. It is absolutely worth your money. The amount of time it's going to save you while working will pay itself off almost immediately. Next, I want to take a look at Flow, which is another extension that's very beautifully designed, very adaptive to your workspace, and customizable. What it allows you to do is use a value graph to modify your keys. So Motion 4 is more like a speed graph. Flow is definitely a value graph. And as far as I know, Flow was the first tool to implement this value style graph into an extension. So what it allows you to do is make the value graph curve that you're used to seeing, apply it to any number of keyframes, and those easings are automatically reflected. If I switch over to my value graph, you can see these curves look exactly like what we have up here in the extension. And what's really cool about Flow is that it allows you to use this value style graph regardless of what property type you're applying it to. So my position is currently separated, but if I combine them again, I wouldn't normally be able to modify the value graph within the graph editor. It's just the way that After Effects works for some reason. When the X and Y position are combined, you can't modify the curves using the value graph. But with Flow, I can just click apply and there we go. I've got my curves. I don't have to separate the dimensions. And I've got auto apply turned on. That's a preference under here. We go to preferences, into behavior, auto apply curve is checked. I'm pretty sure that's off by default, but that way I can very quickly modify my curves and it immediately updates down here. Beyond that, we have some presets, just like in Motion 4 and Duik Angela, but it's really nice to have this icon that reflects the shape of the curve. So these are all the ones that ship with Flow. Let me separate my dimensions again, get rid of those Y keyframes, and I can just click on any one of these to apply them. I can even make my own presets, which again, just like in Motion 4, I've set up up these easing values that I personally use a lot in my own work so that it's just one click apply and there it is. Beyond that, there's not really much to Flow. There is the ability to apply these curves using expressions instead of keyframes, but there really isn't a scenario that I see that being all that necessary. I prefer to work with keyframes, so that's why I have it set to that. You can also type in values for the X and Y coordinates of both of these handles, but that's really it. Flow is a value style graph that allows you to modify any property type. It does what it does, and it does it very well. So if you prefer to use the value graph when easing keyframes, Flow is absolutely worth your consideration. Next up is Curves by Plug and Play, which is a relatively new extension and something that I'm really excited about, and I hope that you are too. At first glance, it looks very similar to Flow. We have a value style graph, and if I select these keyframes, make an easing curve, and click apply, we're going to get that easing immediately applied. It functions almost identically to the way that Flow does, and we even have things like presets. I can make my own custom presets. I can apply presets very quickly. I get the same type of curve icon so I can visually see what the preset looks like, and I can even add favorites so that they're always quick and easy to access. But there are some really great features of curves that I wanna take a look at. I'm not gonna cover every single one of them in this video because Danny over at Plug and Play has created an extensive tutorial covering absolutely everything about this extension. But something I do wanna point out is that notice down here, I get a preview animation every time I adjust this curve, reflecting how this easing is going to be applied. I've got this little ball animation traveling across the frame, which is just really great visual feedback before I've even applied it. Now there isn't currently an auto apply feature like we had in Flow or with Motion 4, so you always gotta click that apply button, but I think that's totally fine. It's not a deal breaker by any means. But it doesn't stop there. The next button is Distribute, and this functions very similarly to another one of Plug and Play's extensions called Lazy, which allows you to distribute layers and keyframes based on this same value graph. So to showcase what this does, let me set these back to just some basic easings. Let's in fact just use a preset of in and out, we'll just say ease. Okay, so now I have a very simple, smooth ball moving back and forth. I'm gonna scale that down and just make a bunch of duplicates. All right, so now we have 10 of these balls moving across the frame all in unison. And with all of these layers selected, I'll jump over to the Distribute tab and just click Apply with this default ease curve. And what you'll notice is that I've got that same easing curve now applied to the timing of my layers. They're all offset in time based on that shape that I drew up here. And the duration of that easing is determined by this number right here. So it's 20 frames between the first and last layer. So now not only am I getting easing on the circle's movement, I'm also getting easing on the offset or the staggering of these layers. If I wanted it to be linear, all I need to do is make this a straight line. Again, click apply, and now they're all offset by equal amounts basically. But I can do the exact same thing to the keyframes without adjusting the layers. If I just set all of those back to where they started and press U to bring up the keyframes, I'll select the keyframes instead of the layers and then modify this curve to be something else. Click apply, and now the keyframes are going to be offset and distributed based on that curve that I just drew. So I can play this back and you'll see that the timing of all of these layers is now updated to match that easing curve. And I can continue to do this any way that I want. Again, getting that visual feedback down in the bottom here. I'll undo back to where they were, all aligned, and then click apply one more time. And now I've got kind of this S-curve timing on all of these keyframes. It's a really quick way to offset keyframes or layers in time and goes right along with the same easing controls that we have for the keyframes themselves. But that's not all to curves. There are two more features that I think are game changers for workflow enhancement in After Effects. So let me get back to a single circle and I'll move that back to the center of my screen. So let's bring up the position and I'll just set these back to 0 and jump over to this section right here. This is bounce, and you saw that when I moved to that tab, we've got this little preview down here and a bunch of curves that look like a bounce from a value graph. So let me just make an animation real quick where we start off the top of the comp. I'll go a couple frames forward and set a Y position keyframe and then move forward about that far and bring it down to where we'll say the ground is right about there. So this is what my animation looks like right now. Let me ease out of this keyframe and I'll just make that a little more dramatic with my value graph. Play that back. We've got a ball that's dropping and stopping at the ground. Now, if I select these two keyframes, I'm not gonna modify any of the controls here. I'm just gonna click apply. More keyframes were just generated, and if I open up my value graph, the same graph that we're seeing up here is now represented in keyframes and reflected in my value graph. and I've got a bouncing ball animation. No expressions, it's actual keyframes, which means I can go in here and modify things freely. If I want some of these bounces to be higher or less extreme, if I want to adjust the timing, it's all there. This is something that I've done a million times. I can keyframe a ball bounce by hand, but this gets me to this point with a single button click. I didn't have to do any extra work, and I've got this framework, or almost like a template, based on the 2 keyframes that I've already set, and I can move from there much more quickly. And there's a lot more to talk about here. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but all of these sliders affect the shape of this bouncing animation and allow you to change things like gravity, how quick it decays, how many bounces there actually are and how intense they are, and even this hang property, which basically pulls out the handles in the value graph. All this I'm able to see right up here in the user interface and get a preview of before I've applied it. Now that I'm kind of happy with the way that looks, let me go back to my original 2 keyframes, click apply, and now I have something that's a little bit more stylized and cartoony. Let's say that lasts too long. I don't want it to seem so floaty. I'll turn the gravity up a little bit, I'll turn the bounciness down a little bit and click apply again. And I've iterated on this really quickly, and I've created something that hits the ground and sticks to the ground with more mass with just a couple of clicks. And I can't overstate of how valuable it is to be able to iterate on something this quickly and just interactively modify a few sliders, generate new keyframes, and then move on. It doesn't take a lot of manual work to get to what you're really after with this tool. And the next tab in curves is equally as amazing. It allows us to do an elastic animation or an overshoot using very similar controls. So let's get rid of these keyframes and set some for the X position. We'll start here and let's bring that keyframe back to about there and go forward a few frames and stop it right about here. So we've got something that moves across the frame. Again, I'm gonna ease out of this first keyframe so it zips up to speed a little bit. Select both of those with the default values, click apply, and immediately we have keyframes to create an overshoot based on the 2 keyframes I set. I'll play it back and I've got this very elastic, springy animation. And basically what's happened is it's taken my second keyframe, which was about here, and moved it to the end. This is the exact same as the second keyframe that I had set, and it's just generated an oscillating overshoot animation between those 2 keyframes. And this can be applied to any property, and again, iterated on very quickly using the visual feedback of this extension to change things like the duration, the decay, which determines how many overshoots there are. Maybe I'll turn that decay Y up a bit, turn the duration around there, and increase the amplitude. That decay Y is a little extreme, so let me turn that back a little. We'll get rid of everything except the first and the last keyframes and try that one more time. I'll select those 2 keyframes, apply, and here's my resulting animation. It overshoots quite a bit, but it slows down. And I could modify this a little bit more if I wanted to, or what I could do is select all of these keyframes right here, leaving the first one alone, turning on my transform controls. I'll zoom in a little bit, move this anchor point to that last keyframe value, then hold Control Command on a Mac, click and drag to make that less intense. And now I've got the same timing of that overshoot, but it just isn't as extreme. So this is a way that you can work with this extension to generate keyframes and get to an end result much more quickly, while still giving you the flexibility of using keyframes to modify and tweak until you're happy with the resulting animation. Now I went a little bit deeper into curves because it is a new extension and there are a lot of features in it that I really haven't seen tackled by any other tool, and I think that you should know about it. But let's take a step back now and just compare all 4 of these tools and why you might choose one over the other. Back to Duik Angela. The reason you probably should consider that over any other tool is because it's free. It's not gonna cost you anything to try it out and to see if it's gonna suit your needs and fulfill what you need it to be, but it is a very cluttered, I would even say bloated script that just has a lot going on that takes up a good amount of your workspace and isn't really customizable other than being able to save your own presets. But for the price of free, you really can't complain. Motion 4 from Mount MoGraph is currently $79, which sounds like a lot of money, but just look at the list of tools that comes with it and the fact that Matt is constantly updating it, making new features, making improvements. It's a really, really well-designed extension. Even though it does have a lot of things going on, it is very customizable to whatever you use most out of it. And I still guarantee you that if you purchase it, you will find great use out of it and you will never regret spending that money. And I didn't talk about it, but it actually has both a bounce and an overshoot feature that uses expressions and slider values to generate those animations automatically based on sets of keyframes. Very similar to what Curves does with bounce and elastic, except instead of using keyframes, it's using expressions. And I've used both of those features extensively in the past, even though they are using expressions, and it can slow down if you're using them on lots and lots of layers. They still work really well. They're very customizable. I just really like the approach that Curves takes of generating actual keyframes that you still have full manual control over after they've been laid out on your timeline. And the ridiculous number of extra features and utilities that it has to offer and will offer in the future is why Motion 4 is one of my top tools of all time for After Effects. Flow is available for $30, which is a much lower price point than Motion 4, but you gotta keep in mind that it just does that one thing. It gives you a value graph and presets that you can apply to any number of keyframes, but that's it. That's what it's for, that's what it does. Curves is a little bit different because the only way that you can currently get it is through a plug and play subscription, which gets you access to more than just Curves, but you have to pay for it on a monthly or yearly basis. It's $14.99 a month or $12.99 a month if you pay for an entire year, and that gets you 5 different tools that Plug and Play makes, as well as some assets and any additional updates or added products that come along in the future during your subscription. But that is something that you seriously have to consider whether or not it's worth it to you to pay a monthly or yearly subscription to have access to these tools. You can think of it basically just like the Creative Cloud subscription model, where you're paying Adobe to use their software for a set amount of time. It's a trend that we're seeing more and more in the software industry ever since Adobe made Creative Cloud, so that's just something we've got to deal with. And again, ultimately it's your decision whether or not you think that paying a subscription for these tools is essential to your workflow in the same way that it is essential to be paying for a Creative Cloud subscription to use After Effects. But Danny from Plug and Play has also hooked us up with a 10% discount. Use the promo code PluginJake at checkout and you can get 10% off. If you can see a lot of value coming out of these tools for your own workflow, then I think that's something that you can justify. But if not, let them know. Leave a comment down on this video or head over to Plug and Play's YouTube. I know that Danny wants to hear from his customers, so let them know exactly how you feel about this subscription service and how it applies to your own workflow. Now, before I wrap up this video, I want to talk about one more honorable mention, which is not so much an easing tool as it is an easing utility, and that is EaseCopy. I made it way too far into my After Effects career before starting to use EaseCopy. It's this compact, tiny little script that is just such a simple little utility, but it's something that I use constantly. What it allows you to do is copy easing values from any number of keyframes and paste it to other keyframes. So let's go back to our elastic animation that we have of the ball, and then I've generated keyframes that align with those position keyframes, but on the scale. So it's going to scale up as well. They're all linear though. What I can do is select all of these keyframes and say copy. It's gonna let me know there are 7 keyframe values copied here. Then I'll select these 7 and paste the ease, and the easing is now transferred over to the scale. So it's going to overshoot on the position, and then it's going to overshoot on the scale. I could combine these two now by lining them up and playing it back again. It's as simple as that, but the ability to just copy and paste easing values instead of trying to line up different properties or having to re-ease them all at the same time is so nice. And this also is compatible with K-bar, so you can assign these functions to buttons within K-bar, or you can also assign headless versions of the scripts for each function to keyboard shortcuts. So you don't even have to have a panel or a button in K-bar. You can literally assign keyboard shortcuts to use these functions and just be on with your day. And before you jump down in the comments and let me know that Flow, Motion, and Curves can all read keyframe values too, you're correct. There is a read value button right here. There's a pull selected keyframe button right here in Motion 4, and there is a read keyframe value right here in Curves. The difference is all 3 of these extensions can only read easing values from 2 keyframes, while EaseCopy can read easing values from any number of keyframes and paste them to an equal number of keyframes. That is why EaseCopy made an honorable mention in this video. On top of that, it is a name your own price script, meaning that you could download it for free and try it out. However, I would highly encourage you once again to support the developer, pay a fair price for the amount of use you're gonna get out of this script, but that does it for the tools I'm gonna talk about in this video. Let me know down in the comments if there are any other easing tools that you're using on a regular basis or that you think I should know about. I'm always open to hearing about new tools. These are just the ones that I think are worth your time and ones that I use in my own After Effects workflow. Also, let me know if there are any other tool topics that you'd like me to talk about here on my channel. I really like doing this type of video and sharing the workflow enhancers that go beyond just the basics of After Effects and really help you work more efficiently when you're creating animations. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you're not already so you're notified when I post other videos like this one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.